Thank you very much. We have taken the briefings. We will now take the questions. Again, I must remind our colleagues that as much as possible, we want to keep this within an hour. We want your questions to come straight and directed at the appropriate minister. Especially for today, it will be better for us to save all our energy and await the broadcast of Mr. President at 7 o'clock. So you have taken your numbers. We will now take the questions.
Good evening, Chairman and all. My name is Abbas Adewale Juma from Daily Trust. We've seen what is happening, especially in Lagos and Ogun State, where armed robbers were using the opportunity of the lockdown to attack the residents who are at home. And they were sending questions to us and also speaking on camera. What is the government going to do to help them secure their lives in the lockdown? And that question is specifically for the chairman of the committee. Then this is for the health minister. He mentioned the use of the face masks. Are we going to take that as the expected national policy on the usage of the face mask? Then also for the national coordinator, Ramadan is some days away, and Nigerians are asking, in the face of the lockdown, what is the committee going to do to ensure that the observance of the Ramadan fasting is eased on Nigerians? Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to members of the task force, and good afternoon, Nigerians at home. I am Itaire Ikpen of the Nigerian Television Authority. Some residents of Ogun and Lagos states in particular, in the last few days during the 2-week lockdown, have been complaining of consistent raid by robbers who go from street to street to harass people. I don't know if the Presidential Task Force is aware of this and if they are working with the security agencies to put a stop to this. And also, we reports reaching us, we hear that some health workers who live in the suburbs of Abuja and Nasarawa State.
As much as possible, we want to keep this within an hour. We want your questions to come straight and directed at the appropriate minister. Especially for today, it will be better for us to save all our energy and await the broadcast of Mr. President at 7 o'clock. So you have taken your numbers. We will now take the questions.
Good evening, Chairman and all. My name is Abbas Adewale Juma from Daily Trust. We've seen what is happening, especially in Lagos and Ogun State, where armed robbers were using the opportunity of the lockdown to attack the residents who are at home. And they were sending questions to us and also speaking on camera. What is the government going to do to help them secure their lives in the lockdown? And that question is specifically for the chairman of the committee. Then this is for the health minister. He mentioned the use of the face masks. Are we going to take that as the expected national policy on the usage of the face mask? Then also for the national coordinator, Ramadan is some days away, and Nigerians are asking, in the face of the lockdown, what is the committee going to do to ensure that the observance of the Ramadan fasting is eased on Nigerians? Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to members of the task force, and good afternoon, Nigerians at home. I am Itaire Ikpen of the Nigerian Television Authority. Some residents of Ogun and Lagos states in particular in the last few days during the 2-week lockdown have been complaining of consistent raid by robbers who go from street to street to harass people. I don't know if the Presidential Task Force is aware of this and if they are working with the security agencies to put a stop to this. And also, reports reaching us, we hear that some health workers who live in the suburbs of Abuja and Nasarawa State, but who are deployed to Nnamdi Azikiwe Airport in Abuja, have transportation difficulty. We hear that a bus was made available to convey them, but for some days they have been having issues with transportation. I don't know if the Minister of Health is aware and if that is being addressed. And again, just to also ask if the federal government has been able to secure the release, or what it is doing to secure the release of the 2 pilots being detained in Rivers State. Thank you.
Good evening, the SGF, honorable ministers, and my colleagues. My name is Rahila Lassa. I report for Voice of Nigeria. My question is a feedback from the audience, and someone sent to me to ask if there is provision for the disabled at the isolation centers, like people using wheelchair, and then the deaf, if there is a sign language expert assigned to help them. Thank you.
Good evening, sirs. My name is Juliana Taiwo Balonya. I write for the Sun newspapers. My first question goes to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. Nigerians are still questioning the method being used to deploy the palliatives to the vulnerable. Experts believe cash transfers are superior to providing free meals. They also believe food distribution can really become a catalyst for worsening the pandemic. The question is, are you going to, and then cash transfers are accountable as they can be concrete evidence of those who benefited. The question is, are you going to change your strategy? To the SGF, sir, we know the President is addressing us tonight. There have been concerns raised with the protocols deployed. Are Nigerians going to see possible review as regards security? You know, seems to be a lot of clashes with other agencies. Are we going to see a review? Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Friday. I'm a reporter with Channels TV. I have 2 questions. I would like the Minister of Health to respond to the first question, and then the National Coordinator for the second. The first question to the Minister of Health has to do with the report that we had during the weekend. We appear to have the lowest confirmed cases that are confirmed this week when we compare it to the last 3 weeks. We had just 5. And fortunately for us in FCT, we didn't record any. It was good news for us that we had those that were even discharged from the hospital. Is this low number of confirmed cases, is it attributed to the fact that we're making progress, or is it attributed to what the National Coordinator pointed out, that there is low number of people who are coming out for testing? Then the second question, the National Coordinator, I would like to respond to this. Now that you notice that during the week, we had more laboratories come on upstream, and we have low demand for testing. So that was what you stated a while ago. Is it not time for us to relax those requirements for testing so that more and more people who really want to test? Because before now, we're talking about selective testing. We're looking at people who have contact with this, those who have confirmed cases, those who have traveled in from endemic countries. Now we have more laboratories. The demand for testing is on the lower side. Is it not time for us to relax those requirements so that we can have more people test? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the PTF, my colleagues. My name is Mohammed Nazif. I work for Voice of Nigeria. I have two questions. One has to do with the issue of testing, of which the last speaker said something about it. But what I want to add is, they made mention here that unless somebody has manifest some symptoms that seems to be COVID-19 symptoms, somebody cannot just wake up and go and ask for testing. The question I want to ask is that, and we said the incubation period is 14 days. Does that mean if somebody is affected with this virus today or within 2-3 days, he can't transfer this virus to another person within this period until he manifested those symptoms? Is that the period when he will be able to transfer the virus to another person? Secondly, talking about the home remedies, it was debunked here, I think, either by the Minister of Health, Minister for Health, or the coordinator, Dr. Ali Usani, on the issue of home remedies. When he was asked concerning a particular governor came out and made claims of what cured him. And you alluded that people should focus on scientific evidences or remedies than to focus on home remedies. Today I was looking at a report carried by most of the newspapers, if I'm right, but one is here, that an associate professor in the University of Ibadan came out and wrote a paper concerning using home remedies that can promote immunity and protect COVID-19. Particularly inside the paper or inside this thing, she made mention of neem. I think it has to do with neem tree, neem and turmeric that can be used. So the question I want to ask, we are here, or you are here, always telling Nigerians that people should not focus on the home remedies. But when we see high-profile people, for instance, an associate professor coming from University of Ibadan coming out to talk this, I don't know how true it is in the paper, and if it is wrong or it is fake, what are we still doing about shutting down some of these online newspapers that are still carrying some of these fake news? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Honorable Ministers, and members of the PTF Committee. My name is Musa Aminu Dambo. I report for Hausa Service of Voice of Nigeria. My own is clarification. There is story going around, especially on social media, that the equipment brought by Chinese government was faulty and asked to take it back by federal government. So I want committee to clarify on this. For the benefit of those that want to listen in Hausa, akwai rahotanni ko kuma labarai da suke yawo ko kare kai na kafan yada labarai na zamani wanda suke cewa agaji ko kuma taimako ko kayan agaji da gwamnatin China ta aiko da shi zuwa Najeriya ba a yarda da sai hancin shi ba, sannan gwamnatin tarayyar Najeriya ta buƙaci a koma da wannan zuwa ƙasar China. So ina buƙatar kwamiti ta yi mana ƙarin haske ko kuma ta mai 'yan ƙasa masu kallon mu da sauraron mu ƙarin haske akan wannan dambarwa.
Good afternoon, Mr. SGF, the ministers, the coordinator, my colleagues, and I am Rachel from the News Agency of Nigeria. My question is for the Minister of Health. Sir, the Federal Ministry of Health disbursed the basic healthcare provision to 20 states. And our health system is kind of stretched because of the pandemic. And the state need funds. So I would like to know if the Ministry of Health is going to be giving money to the state through the steering committee. And I would also like to know the state of the steering committee. More so, you find out that donor partners like Gateway Foundation, Department for International Development, and World Bank are trying to help us in this outbreak, but they want to do it through the basic healthcare provision, and they are not convinced that the program is still on. So I don't know what the federal government will be doing in making sure these donors, maybe to encourage them to donate through that program if possible. More so, there's a rise in domestic violence in Nigeria, but it's not just particular to Nigeria. The WHO chief in his speech said that governments should ensure that women and girls are being taken care of, like the rapid response for the outbreak. So I also like to know what the government will be doing through its multi-sectoral team to help victims and survivors. Many thanks.
Good afternoon, members of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. My name is Yemi Adebayo from AIT. I have some couple of questions that I would want the PTF to respond to. And the first is, the SGFs about 5 days ago or more, you said Nigeria is to receive a fresh set of equipment from the UN. I want to know, has this equipment arrived? That's the first one. Then secondly, the Foreign Affairs Minister, sir, did they say that a couple of Nigerians arrived from Ivory Coast and Togo, and you did say that they will go through the testing process to actually ascertain their status of COVID-19. I want to know, is the test ongoing now, and have they been camped to actually ensure that these tests are carried out on them? Then finally, residents of Galadima in Abuja, there's some sort of apprehension between them now because there are allegations that the federal government and the FCT authority have approved a piece of land in Galadima, very close to the Sun City Estate in Abuja, to be used as burial site for COVID-19 patients. I want to know how true is this. Is the Ministry of Health aware of this? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, National Coordinator, Honorable Ministers, my colleagues. My name is Amaka Ude. I report for Arise News, and I have just one question. And the question is directed at the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. Well, we've seen your pictures and the videos of you going to different states, to share this palliatives. But I want to get an update, because the last time you told us that you were working to improve on the register of those who are eligible for these palliatives. I remember you said 2.6 million households with a total of about 11 million Nigerians were beneficiaries of that palliative. So has that number gone up? And where are we in terms of including more people, especially those whose businesses have been affected by the lockdown as well as the coronavirus pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you. We have taken the questions. They have been directed at the Honorable Minister of Health, the National Coordinator, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Honorable Minister of Information and Culture, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs. The Minister of Aviation has a question, but he is not here. His permanent secretary is here. He will respond to that. And finally, the SGF. We'll begin with the Honorable Minister of Health.
Hello. Hello. Step aside. Thank you very much for the questions that came up. The first one has to do with the mask. If you listen carefully, we said we are recommending. We are not saying it's compulsory, we are recommending. Secondly, we also said that it does not have to be hospital grade mask. It doesn't have to be medical grade or surgical grade. You can make your own. And preferably, in fact, your mask can be washable, so you can wash it and iron it and reuse. The ones many of us are using here now are single use, which you have to throw away, but you don't need that for day-to-day activities. And the purpose of that mask is to shield you and shield your opposite, because if anyone is emitting any kind of droplets or particles, as we say, if someone is coughing or sneezing, they push out particles and droplets which can travel a certain distance and be able to infect somebody who is less than more than 2 meters away. That's why we talk about social distancing. But that kind of emission also takes place when people are shouting, or when they laugh, or when they exclaim, or even when they sigh. So these are emissions, or even when you sneeze, when you blow your nose. So these emissions you can capture if you are wearing a protective barrier. It can even be the scarf you put across your mouth or whatever it is, so that you do not run the risk of being able to shed it to someone else, or if you are the person sitting down somewhere cannot easily get it to you, you can assume that it's caught on the front of your mask. It's arrested. If you're talking to someone, and at least majority of it will be arrested on the mask. That's why we say that it must be washed every evening, preferably in warm water, and then dried and then ironed. If you do that, you are safe to reuse it the next day. We are making that a recommendation, and also particularly stretching it to those who handle food. Food vendors are particularly advised to do that in the interest of their customers. Now, as for the case of the health workers who have to travel from far away, usually it will be an arrangement made by the particular institution employing them. If it's, for example, the hospital, National Hospital, or the University of Abuja Hospital, they usually make arrangements. Some of them do. Or the workers have joint arrangement for buses that take them to work. But you all know that there is also a work from home order for levels 1 to 12, so that the number of people who actually have to go out is not really expected to be that high. But if any group has a challenge with that kind of mobility, they can always ask the Ministry of Health, and we try and support them with a solution to that transportation problem. I think the other question was about the deaf, if I understand correctly, but I think that's something that's taken care of or the hard of hearing in the facility, either by relatives or by order. Now, the other question is about the low confirmed cases here. The way we are right now, the figures you see for new infections will fluctuate. It is not going to be constantly the same. You can see it rise sharply, you can see it come down by a bit. We are making the testing more efficient. We are increasing the volume of testing, so we are expecting to find more cases. We are doing more of smart testing, testing that targets where you are most likely to find the cases. That's why we have the criteria that if you return from abroad within the last 14 days, you can even stretch it to a few days more than that. Or if you have been in contact with someone who just returned from abroad, of which you know that that person just came back and might be positive without symptoms, then you are eligible for a test. Finally, looking at the community transmission, if you're in a neighborhood where there are large number of confirmed people, well, of course, you can also be eligible if you are in a neighborhood where so many people have tested positive, or again, if you have symptoms that are suggestive of that. If you have catarrh, a cough, particularly a dry cough, you have fever. Those are symptoms that are quite suggestive. Even though you cannot explain where you came from, you have not been abroad, you have not seen anyone who been in touch with anyone who has been abroad, you can also be eligible. And what is going to happen very soon is that the NCDC is preparing to have agreements with certain private sector collection points in various areas of the town, which will be made public so that you can go to a sample collection site and your sample will be taken. And first of all, you'll be interviewed if you are eligible, and if you are eligible, your sample will be taken, and a vehicle will go around, collect all the samples, and do a central testing. So that will reduce the work for NCDC and bring in more efficiency and get more people to be tested. So there is no particular meaning to be read into the fact that we had only a few cases, only 5 cases today compared to the previous days. It will fluctuate as the work goes on. But what's important is that if you test positive, you need to go into isolation for the prescribed period. There are people who feel very well, and those are the ones we have trouble with, because they say, I'm well, I'm not sick, nothing wrong with me. They have those symptoms, but they're quite capable of transmitting an infection. Now, with the question of home remedies, there are theories and postulations about certain things that boost your immune response. It is said that if you take vitamin C, or you take ginger, or you take neem, or whatever, it boosts your immunity. We know that response to viral diseases as a whole also is connected to your immune response, because it's eventually your antibodies that you build that will tackle the virus. And people now speculate that if you are taking something that boosts your immunity, it will help to tackle the virus. That is hypothetical. It's a theory that is propounded. If it helps, very fine. But nobody will tell you that that's a cure. So you must bear that in mind. They can tell you it will help you to build antibodies. So I'm sure the professors who said that were saying things that will help you to build antibodies, and we know that your antibodies are what actually will, at the end of the day, tackle the virus for you. But I'm almost very certain that they didn't pronounce it as a cure. About the equipment being faulty, we have not even actually taken possession of the equipment yet. So we have not determined that they are faulty. We are very, very grateful for equipment that is brought in from all sources, because we are trying to build up our stockpile. We need a good stockpile to be able to be ready for any eventuality in future, particularly those things that we do not manufacture here. We need a stockpile. We don't know what's coming. This corona outbreak is a huge thing, particularly now that we are in the area of community transmission. We can see the problems that other countries have. When you look at it on television, it's terrifying. And many of them are complaining. Even developed countries are complaining they don't have masks. They complain they don't have PPE. The story was that some health workers in one country went without PPE to work, and they had high fatality rates for healthcare workers. We don't want to get in that situation. That's why we are very keen to build a stockpile to accept donations of PPE in our stores. We have a medical store in Lagos and one here in Abuja. And we keep all these things and use them very judiciously and carefully so that it will last us for the foreseeable future. I think with the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, no, it is not. Basic Healthcare Provision Fund is not asleep. It is still undergoing a few minor adjustments to reduce some errors of that were pointed out at some stage. I think that within next week we should be getting the manual back and then start working fully with it. We have been asked that question before, whether it's put in the cooler. It is not in the cooler. So within the next few days we shall bring it out, and because the fine work has been done, it's just the finishing touches to the updated and upgraded version with which everybody is happy. As far as if there are donors who want to support World Bank and so on, we are open. we're receptive to donations. I know that the EU has promised to give us some donations, which we strongly appreciate. And if other partners and donors are keen into that donation, we surely will appreciate it to help us to be more comfortable with our stand in equipment and materials, which we want to make sure is available everywhere they are needed in this country. Now, talking about the UN equipment, yet the UN promised us, and they arrived today, this morning. So your question is just on time, because I can confirm that the 3 tranches of the equipment that the UN donated have arrived. They include also commodities which will further enrich our stockpile, and they include also 50 ventilators which we are going to apply for in our isolation, in our ICU centers. Thank you.
Thank you. The national coordinator.
Thank you. I believe I have a few questions, some of which have been answered already by the Honorable Minister of Health. So the first one has to do with the issue of Ramadan being a few days away. And what is the committee doing to ease the Ramadan period? We will be providing advice and guidance for the public. This will be published before the Ramadan period with regards to how they can, how the public can continue to protect themselves from this infection. It's really important that we continue to adapt to the times. This is a challenging period for all of us. We are not in normal situations. We can see what's happening in Saudi Arabia, for instance, where the Lesser Hajj itself has been cancelled. And Islam definitely talks about persons making adjustments in times of epidemics. This is well known to our ulama, and we are pleading with our religious leaders to please help us spread this message. We are in challenging times. This disease kills, as we can see in our TV and radio all the time. We would like to be around for the next Ramadan, and therefore we need to protect ourselves now. Government will continue to provide the palliatives that we have been discussing earlier on to ease the difficulties that we are currently in. But those restriction measures, particularly the issue of social distancing and mass gatherings and personal hygiene, respiratory hygiene, etc., they need to continue during the period of Ramadan. Let's try as much as we can to get through this difficult period so that we can continue, so that we can go back to our normal life and have future Ramadans, inshallah. The second has to do with the provision of, in terms of accommodating the disabled in isolation centers. Thank you for raising it. We will be inspecting some of the isolation centers later on today, and we have already taken this on board. Where there's a need to get people to help with sign language, as you can see here, we will make sure we accommodate that. Is it time to relax testing? Absolutely not. Remember, these test kits, A, they're expensive, B, every country in the world wants it. There's no room for massive community testing of coronavirus. I would rather do 100 tests and get 10 positive than do 1,000 tests and get 10 positive. It's all about improving the efficiency of the test. It's much better to test persons that have symptoms, because what we call the pre-test probability is much higher. When we talk about incubation periods, this is the period between when you get an infection and the time the symptoms happen. And the incubation period is the period when the virus multiplies deep in the body and it is not excreted. The way we do the test for coronavirus is a PCR test where you do a swab from the nose and the throat. If you are in the incubation period, you will not be excreting the virus. And the test is looking for the presence of the virus. Therefore, if you do the test during the incubation period, which may range from between 2-3 days to up to 14 days, the test will be negative. In other words, you could still be in an incubation period and it will give you false assurance that everything is all right. That is why we do not recommend doing the test in the absence of symptoms. The reason why in certain situations people might appear to be asymptomatic and still have a positive result, which is relatively rare, is because a lot of people might have mild symptoms of COVID that you will not even notice. You might have a mild sore throat when you wake up in the morning, you not even notice that you've forgotten it, or have a mild cough for a few hours in a day and it will not even bother you. Maybe already you have a cough like a smoker, etc. So in those instances you would think that you are asymptomatic, but in actual fact you do have mild symptoms. Respiratory viruses over time have evolved to induce coughing, sneezing, and runny nose so that they can get out of the body. That's how they infect the next person. And that's why those symptoms are there. And that's why we need to do the test at the right time in order to pick up the virus. So the answer really is absolutely not. We're not going to start doing massive testing in the community. It will be inefficient, it will be expensive, and it's not going to help us increase the number of positives. And finally, the issue of home remedies, which the Honorable Minister of Health has kindly responded to already. But all I can say at this point is making claims that cannot be defended is really very unhelpful to the pandemic. As scientists, we all know how we get medications into the system. You have to do a rigorous study going into different phases, and you then finally agree based on the studies that have been published whether or not it works. You compare the drug with another agent that is similar but does not have the same properties. You do not come out to make a claim based simply on your assumptions. The reason I keep on saying this, the reason why if I have a headache, I will go and buy paracetamol with absolute confidence that that paracetamol will work, is because the paracetamol has been put through a rigorous process of randomized controlled trials that has repeatedly shown that it will work regardless of whether you are black or white, old or young, regardless of your situation. And that's how trials are done. So for experimental therapies for COVID, they need to be done in the context of a clinical trial. And there are trials already going on, sponsored by WHO, looking at hydroxychloroquine, the HIV drugs, and interferon. Those trials will give us an idea fairly soon, hopefully, in terms of what is the best treatment for COVID. But certainly, I would caution the public against listening or accepting any home remedies that would protect you or stop you from getting COVID. We all know how we can stop ourselves from catching COVID, and those prevention measures are the things that we should really keep to. Thank you very much. Did you ask a question on gender-based violence? I didn't hear gender-based violence. Okay, I apologize. So, gender-based violence, yes, it's certainly unacceptable. We know in this period of lockdown, we are all with the family at home and tempers might flare, etc. But it's certainly unacceptable. As the WHO said, in this period and time, we will be having a lot of incidences, and I hope the security agencies take this seriously. But it's something that is unacceptable regardless of whether we are in a pandemic or not. Regardless, and I hope we'll continue to take those measures to eliminate gender-based violence in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Minister of Humanitarian Affairs.
Thank you very much, and the chairman of the task force, honorable ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the press, compliments of the season. Well, I have two questions that are similar, so let me start with the one that is different on the food distribution that we are doing, the modality we're using. We have a national emergency response plan on ground, which has in it different stakeholders from the national, state down to the local government. They are all members of the committee that carry out this distribution of food relief to the affected population. But going forward, we've decided that we're going to be handing over this food relief to the state governors for onward distribution to their citizens here, the poor and vulnerable in the society. In fact, I've started that. I was in Lagos last week and Ogun State, and I've handed over trucks of food relief to these respective governors. So far, we have reached out to the 3 affected states that have been locked down by the federal government. I mean, 2 states plus the FCT. We have deployed this food relief to these 3 locations. And also, we have deployed some food relief to the 2 southeastern states, Imo and Ebonyi, specifically. On the question around disbursement of this cash to poor and vulnerable households, I've mentioned here before that this is a program that has been in existence since 2016, and we're using the existing register. We will give them 5,000 naira per month. And now that Mr. President has directed that we give 2 months advance, that's why we're giving this 20,000 naira. Yes, it's a process that looks really very cumbersome. And for the purpose of transparency and accountability, the ministry has already begun the digitalization of this process, end to end. We have 4 pilot states that are on digital payment so far, and we are continuing with that. We hope that in our next round payment, we'll be able to do at least half of the states of the Federation will go digital. It's not a one-day off thing. It takes a process. And we're using mobile phones, mobile wallets, the BVNs of these beneficiaries where it exists, because you know that it's not all of these beneficiaries that are on the banking system. So we look at all these issues, and we're working on it. And we're working, I mentioned last time that we're working on the rapid expansion of the register. And this is now, it's also not a one-day off thing. But I assure you that we have started the process. It's not something that we can get today or tomorrow, but the most important thing is to start, and we have started. And our main focus now is going to be really on the urban poor, because these are people that have now become vulnerable as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. And we're also focusing on persons living with disabilities. Already we have some number in our existing National Social Register, but now we're going to focus more in registering these people with special needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now take the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, and compliments of the season to you all. The question was in respect of the Nigerians who are compatriots who came back from Togo and Côte d'Ivoire. As you recall, there were 60 Nigerians who were stranded in Côte d'Ivoire, and we were able to bring them back as they had to go through Togo and Benin before coming into the country. And then there's another set of 24 Nigerians who were also trapped in Togo. And we've also been able to arrange for them to come home, traversing Benin. And for that, we'd like to express our deep gratitude to the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Interior of Togo and Benin, and also our ambassador in Togo and our chargé d'affaires in Benin for the excellent work they did, and also the Honorable Minister of Interior who worked very closely with me to achieve all that. Now, the question is whether they are being tested, and the answer is that they have all gone into 14 days of isolation, which is the protocol. And as the National Coordinator has mentioned, tests will only be necessary if they start to show symptoms during those 14 days. And in any case, of those that came from Togo, the 24, they were tested in Togo, and they all returned negative on those tests. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Permanent Secretary, Aviation.
Mr. Chairman, honorable ministers and members of the press. There was a question about the pilots that were arrested last week in Port Harcourt last Tuesday. So far they are still there, but the federal government is in consultation with the River State government to have them released as soon as possible, because their arrest is also taking a different dimension as air traffic unions and other unions of the aviation are threatening to go on strike. We hope that this misunderstanding will soon be resolved so that we can have them out as the operation was legal. Thank you very much.
Finally, we'll take the chairman of the PTF, the SGF.
I think all the questions have been answered. You left me with the matters of the armed robbers. Well, I think I'm happy to report to you this afternoon that even this morning we had a meeting with the intelligence and security community to review our strategies going forward. We've received those reports. I've seen some of the clips on the social media. But what the intelligence and security operatives will first do is to run them through and authenticate the information, pin down the locations, which obviously will be a basis of their subsequent actions. But I can assure you that I even spoke with the governor of Lagos this afternoon, and they've been holding their security meetings and consulting, because every governor is the chief security officer of his state. And if there are issues that they can't deal with, they will escalate it to the national. We know that traditionally there are some flashpoints in every state, and I believe that the law enforcement agencies have mapped out those flashpoints for decisive action. But let me assure Nigerians that it is the responsibility of government to cater for their welfare and for their security and safety, and we will not in any way abdicate that responsibility. That is an area where I know that Mr. President is resolved to ensure that he keeps faith with that, and that whatever happens, he will not allow Nigerians to be subjected to this kind of treatment We are in a difficult moment, fighting an enemy that is unseen, that is reckless, that is vicious in its spread, and in its attack on our wealth and our health. I think Nigerians would not want another seen enemy wanting to intrude into their affairs. So I believe that we will be decisive in dealing with these situations as they arise in the different states based on the security prescriptions of those areas and also the analysis that will be conducted by the security and law enforcement agencies. Correspondent action will be put in place. I think that is about all the questions. Most of the other questions have been answered. There was a question that had to deal with the review, whether we are going to review the protocols the protocols that were issued. Well, that will be predicated on what Mr. President says this evening. I do not want to preempt because I'm not seized of what he's going to say. I would prefer to await the broadcast of Mr. President, and as a task force thereafter, we will see whether there are needs for review of our protocol or there is need to strengthen whatever we have released so that we can achieve the objective for why the lockdown was put in place in the first place. Equipment, yes, we've taken equipment of the United Nations, about 5-ton quantity of equipment, like the Minister for Health rightly said. I think tomorrow you are going to have an occasion to receive it formally. So most of our partners are very encouraged with what we are doing in Nigeria. And when they make commitments, they will want to fulfill those commitments to assist us, knowing fully well that we have a population of about 200 million people, and everything must be done to safeguard this population, because an explosion of even this pandemic in Nigeria would definitely affect most of the countries on the continent of Africa. So there is keen interest to ensure that we do everything humanly possible to flatten the curve, to identify the people, trace the contacts, test them, take them into isolation, and manage them through proper care. Thank you.
Which one?
Well, I wouldn't know about that, but I believe that we have sufficient burial grounds scattered all over the city of Abuja. We have Apo, we have Gwarimpa, we have several other burial grounds. I don't think we indulge. I'm not sure if the FCT has done that. We are not expecting an explosion in the fatalities. So far, we have 10. Unfortunately, we have 10. But I believe that we are not expecting an upsurge of fatalities. But I wouldn't be able to be definitive because I've not spoken to the Honorable Minister of the FCT or the Minister of State or the Director of Land Services, whose responsibility is to allocate the land for public use and public good. But I will follow up on that to confirm. But one day, everybody has to die, and a burial price is an important abode for each and every one of us.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of today's national briefing. The message is coming out of today. Please remain calm, maintain personal hygiene, observe physical distancing, stay at home, protect your elderly ones.